Hello. My name is Tess Whitman. At Christmas, while the lights were still warm and the wine hadn't run dry, my mother raised a glass to my sister, the captain. She called her a hero. Then she turned to me and said, "Thank you for guarding the gate." I laughed. Quietly. Hours later, that same sister put me in handcuffs. In front of my entire family. Accused me of theft. Of betrayal. But the real betrayal? It wasn't the cuffs. It was the years leading up to that moment. The whispered erasures. The jokes at my expense. The family photos that never had my name beneath them. So I called someone who would listen. And by the time they showed up, those with real authority, my sister wasn't the one wearing the uniform anymore. Ever wonder how far a family will go to protect the wrong person? Keep watching. The first snow had already started to melt along the shoulder of I-95 when I saw the sign for Midlothian. The highway was wet, shining under the yellow of my headlights, and the wipers made that soft rhythm against the windshield that fills a car with its own kind of silence. My mother's text had arrived 2 nights ago, short and sweet. "You should come. It's Christmas. Captain will be there too." That was all. "No, we miss you. No, drive safe." Just that little reminder, Captain will be there too. I hadn't been home for 3 years. The last Christmas I spent in this house, Callista had already been promoted, and my parents were introducing her to everyone as our shining star. I'd smiled, kept my mouth shut, and left before dessert. Since then, the holidays had been easier spent in my apartment, with cheap wine and bad movies. But this year, something in me felt pulled back. Maybe it was habit, or guilt, or the way time makes people foolishly hope that things might have changed. By the time I pulled into the old neighborhood, the air smelled like wet pine and chimney smoke. The houses all looked the same. Bright lights on every porch, wreaths hung perfectly, cars lined up in driveways. My parents' house still had that same blue door, that same squeaky porch step that never got fixed. I parked at the curb and sat for a moment, fingers gripping the steering wheel. It wasn't fear I felt. It was that deep, familiar weight, like walking back into a story where everyone already knows your lines but you. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and roasted ham wrapped around me as soon as I stepped in. The living room looked smaller than I remembered, but maybe that's just how things seem when you stop belonging to them. Family pictures filled the mantel, but my photo from graduation was gone. In its place, Callista in uniform, medals shining, smiling like a billboard for discipline. There were 2 new framed articles from the local newspaper about her service. I glanced around for mine, nothing. Not even the old one from my security job award ceremony. Look who finally decided to show up. Mom's voice floated from the kitchen. She came out wiping her hands on a red dish towel, smiling too wide. "You look tired. Long drive." "For hours," I said. "Traffic wasn't bad." "Well, you made it. I was worried you'd flake again." She laughed, like it was a joke. "Captain's in the den. She just got back from D.C. Big presentation at the Pentagon." Of course she was. I set my small gift basket on the floor near the shoe rack, a couple of handmade candles, and a jar of apple butter I'd picked up from a market on the way. "Where should I put this?" "Oh, I'll get it later," Mom said, waving her hand. She glanced toward the hallway. "Callista, your sister's here." I barely had time to take off my coat before my sister walked in like she was arriving at a press conference. Her uniform was crisp, her hair pulled back, so tightly it made her look taller. She gave me a smile that didn't touch her eyes. "Tess, you made it." I did. "You still working that security job?" she asked, as if she couldn't quite remember what I did for a living. "I'm still at Federal Protective," I said. "We handle a few government sites now." "Oh, right." Her smile deepened. "Keeping the gates safe." Mom chuckled softly, the kind of chuckle people give when they're not sure if something's funny or cruel. The evening dragged into dinner. The house buzzed with conversation, plates clinking, silverware tapping. The table was long, set perfectly, and of course, Callista sat at the head beside Dad. I took the seat near the end, next to the sideboard where the gravy boats were lined up like soldiers. The candles flickered. The roast smelled good enough to make you forget how much you hated being there. For a few minutes, I almost managed to feel normal, just family, food, laughter. But peace never lasts long here. Mom lifted her glass of wine. "I want to make a toast," she said, her eyes sparkling in that way that always meant trouble. "To my beautiful captain, who makes us proud every day. Leading troops, winning awards, making this family shine." Everyone clinked glasses, a small wave of applause. Then she turned toward me, smile tightening. "And to our ever-watchful little gate guard. Thank you for holding the fort." The table erupted in laughter. Callista laughed loudest. Dad joined in, maybe because it was easier than not. I managed a small smile and raised my glass. "Glad to serve," I said, my voice steady. It was the kind of joke that stayed in the air long after people stopped laughing. Even as plates were passed around and conversation moved on, that sentence echoed in my head. Holding the fort. That's all I was to them, a placeholder, a role that didn't matter unless someone else wasn't there to fill it. After dinner, I helped clear the table. The chatter from the living room was all about Callista's recent award ceremony. Every few minutes, I heard her name, followed by laughter or clinking glasses. I stacked plates, rinsed them, tried to keep my face neutral. But then, from the next room, I heard it. My name, followed by a chuckle. "She tries, bless her heart," someone said. I froze, plate in hand. My palms were wet from the water, but it wasn't the sink that made them shake. I took a breath, set the plate down gently, and turned off the tap. The sound of Callista's voice filled the air again. "It's not her fault, Mom. Not everyone's cut out for leadership." I smiled to myself. Leadership. That word again. I walked outside to the porch for air. The night was clear now, cold enough to bite my lungs. Across the street, kids were still playing in the snow, their laughter carried on the wind. I sat on the top step, pulled my phone from my pocket, and stared at the dark screen. I opened a new note and typed slowly. "This year, document everything. Silence doesn't protect you." For years, I'd stayed quiet, convinced that peace meant pretending. That night, though, something shifted. Maybe it was the way Mom had said it, the ever-watchful gate guard. Maybe it was the way Callista laughed, like she owned the air I breathed. Either way, I realized something simple. They would keep defining me as long as I let them. When the dishes were done, when the house fell quiet, I walked past the family photos again. The candles had burned low. The room smelled of pine and wax. I looked at the picture of Callista on the mantel, her uniform bright even in the dim light. For a moment, I wondered what it must feel like to have your story displayed that way, to have everyone see only the best version of you. I found an old photo album tucked behind the couch, the one Mom used to keep before digital frames took over. Flipping through it, I stopped at a group photo, Christmas, maybe 15 years ago. Everyone's smiling. Callista in the middle, me at the edge, half cut off. My shoes, I remember, had been muddy from helping shovel the driveway. Mom had told me to stand in the back, so they wouldn't show. I closed the album. Standing there, the only light coming from the fireplace, I could almost hear that camera click again, that polite voice saying, "Closer together, please." But I wasn't part of that frame anymore. And maybe that was the point. I took one last look at the picture, then at the dark window where my reflection looked back at me. Not smiling, not apologizing. Just steady. "This year," I whispered, "I'll smile like I'm part of the picture, even if they crop me out later."
I didn't sleep much that night.
The house creaked like it was whispering old secrets through the walls, and the faint hum of the heating vent sounded like breathing. From my guest room, I could see the glow of Christmas lights outside, blinking red and white through the frosted window. Every few seconds, I heard Callista's laughter floating from the den, bright, performative, like she was hosting a conference instead of visiting her parents. I told myself to let it go. Tomorrow I'd play along, smile when needed, say little. By morning, the smell of bacon and coffee drifted through the hallway. I brushed my hair, slipped into a sweater, and walked toward the kitchen. Mom was already there, directing everything like a stage manager. She had her Christmas apron on, the one that said merry and bright, even though she rarely was either.
"Morning," I said.
She didn't look up. Can you make sure the serving spoons are polished? The guests will be here in an hour. I nodded, scanning the kitchen counter. Callista's gift bags were stacked neatly, gold ribbons tied perfectly. Each had tags written in metallic ink. To Uncle Ray, to Aunt Jean, to Dad from your favorite captain. The one marked to Mom had 2 small boxes inside, identical, wrapped with a silver bow. You've really gone all out, I said. Mom smiled faintly. Well, it's not every day the captain comes home. She just knows how to make things memorable. Right. I wiped my hands on a towel, looked toward the living room, and that's when I saw it, the wall. The old gallery wall that used to hold family photos had transformed. Every frame was new, modern, arranged with precision. Callista in uniform shaking hands with a general. Callista at a podium. Callista in a parade, saluting. Articles from the Richmond Times and the Gazette framed neatly, each headline shouting her name. My eyes moved automatically to where my college photo used to hang. The nail was still there, but the frame was gone. I looked lower and saw a dusty rectangle on the paint, lighter than the rest of the wall, where my picture once hung. Mom, I called quietly. What happened to the older pictures? She joined me at the doorway, drying her hands. Oh, I rotated them out. It's a new decade, Tess. People like to see what's current. Right, I said softly. Current. From the corner of my eye, I noticed my graduation photo half hidden behind a potted plant on the side cabinet. The corner of the frame stuck out like it had been pushed there in a hurry. Mom didn't notice my silence. She was already turning toward the window, smiling at a car pulling up. That must be your aunt and uncle. Be sweet, please. As people arrived, the house filled with noise. Heels on tile, the scrape of chairs, the clinking of wine glasses. Everyone greeted Callista like she'd just returned from a deployment. She stood near her wall of glory, letting people comment on her medals. That one's from the Leadership Summit, she said, tapping the gold pin. And this was for the logistics project last spring. A nightmare, but worth it. Mom beamed. That's our girl. Frontline leader. Decorated. I smiled politely from the edge of the room, where no one would notice if I disappeared. After a while, Mom began calling everyone to dinner. Come on in. We've got ham, scalloped potatoes, and Tess's cranberry chutney. She still makes it every year. The dining table looked like a magazine cover, fine china, candles, gold-rimmed glasses. At the center, a white card with bold letters read Captain Callista Whitman. Her name shone in metallic ink, perfectly placed in front of the main plate. I searched for my name. Nothing. I looked along the table, past the cousins, past the side seats. The last chair, near the kitchen entry, had no card. Beside it was a small trash bin tucked discreetly under the counter. Mom gestured vaguely toward it. You can sit there, Tess. It's closer to the kitchen. You're good at helping. A cousin leaned in, whispering, Oh, are you serving or? I smiled tightly. Something like that. When we sat down, Callista raised her glass. Before we start, I just want to say thank you for the warm welcome. It's been a big year for me and for our family. She paused just long enough for everyone to nod. You know, success takes discipline. It's about showing up, even when people doubt you. The table hummed with agreement. Mom reached over, patting her hand. You've earned it, sweetheart. I didn't say a word. I focused on my plate, on the cranberry chutney I'd made from scratch. I noticed it sat untouched in the center of the table, the spoons still clean. Instead, people reached for the store-bought sauce Callista had brought. She noticed too. Not everyone's got the time to hand-make stuff, she said with a small laugh. Some of us have real schedules. The room chuckled. I caught a drip of wine on my sleeve, dabbed it gently, and said nothing. The evening dragged in that strange way family dinners do. Too long, too loud, and full of things nobody should say but always do. I passed plates, smiled when spoken to, and watched the clock crawl past 8. When dessert came out, I offered to help slice the pie. Mom waved me off. We've got it covered. You sit. You've done enough. I leaned back in my chair, looking toward the living room again. The glow from the tree reflected off the glass frames on the wall. Callista's smiling face stared back from every direction. People clapped as she told a story about her team fixing a crisis during a storm. "We worked 72 hours straight," she said, voice firm. "That's leadership for you." Someone asked what I'd been doing lately. "Oh, same old," I said. "Security management. Mostly logistics." Aunt Jean smiled politely. "You mean like guarding buildings?" "More or less," I said. Callista laughed softly, shaking her head. "Don't undersell yourself, Tess. You're the best at keeping watch." Everyone laughed again. I excused myself to refill my water glass. In the kitchen, I took a slow breath and stared at the reflection in the window, me, blurred by Christmas lights, holding a glass half full. From there, I could hear them laughing still. My name came up, followed by another joke. It rolled through the house like a quiet wind, harmless on the surface, but cutting underneath. Something in me shifted. I wasn't angry, not exactly. It was more like recognition, seeing the same play performed again, just with better lighting. As I walked back to the table, I caught sight of a framed headline on the counter. "Captain Whitman brings honor home." I wondered if anyone would ever know that I'd written the report her award came from, back when I worked in logistics. Probably not. They never remembered my name. And suddenly, I remembered something I hadn't thought about in years. My 8th birthday. The cake had pink frosting, too bright, with "Happy Birthday Callista" scrawled across the top. Someone realized halfway through the song that it was my birthday, not hers. They laughed it off. "We can fix it," Mom said, scraping off the name and writing mine in smaller letters underneath. But the picture they kept in the album still said Callista. Back then, I'd laugh too, because it was easier than crying. Now, as I sat at that table, surrounded by the same smiles, the same careful cruelty, I understood how small moments become habits. The plates clattered, chairs scraped, conversations overlapped. Someone asked for coffee. Someone else turned up the music. I just sat there, tracing the edge of my napkin. They'd forgotten my name before. They'd do it again. But this time, I wasn't going to let that be the ending. I looked down at the empty space in front of me. No name card, no label, and I whispered to myself, low enough that no one could hear. No name card doesn't mean I don't have a seat at this table. The next morning came with that pale winter light that makes everything look washed out. The house smelled faintly of pine and coffee, though most of the warmth seemed to belong to Callista's laughter drifting down the hall. By mid-morning, the kitchen was buzzing again. Mom reheating food, Dad pretending to help, and Callista directing things like it was her command post. After breakfast, people gathered in the living room to exchange gifts. Wrapping paper covered the floor like colorful snow. Callista stood front and center, handing out boxes like she was Santa's executive assistant. "Uncle Ray, this one's for you." "Aunt Jean, don't open that yet, it's fragile." Her voice filled every corner of the room. I sat near the coffee table, hands folded, watching her orchestrate the moment. Mom hovered beside her, glowing with pride. "That's my girl," she kept saying. Callista's gifts were all identical. Monogrammed sets of perfume, sleek keychains with the army crest, picture frames with her initials etched in silver. Everything neat, uniform, predictable. When she finally reached for the last bag, she glanced at me. "Oh, almost forgot," she said, pulling out a small plastic shopping bag from under the chair. "This one's for you, Tess." The bag was wrinkled, not even tied. Inside were a pair of novelty socks, bright pink with reindeer printed across them. No box, no tag. Just socks. Mom laughed. "It's the thought that counts." "Very practical, Callista." "Yeah," Callista said with a smile. "She's always cold down there at those gates." Everyone laughed again. I turned the socks over in my hand and managed a quiet, "Thank you." My fingers tightened around the fabric until the edges dug into my palm. The smell of cinnamon candles and burnt coffee filled the air, and for a second, I thought I might choke on it. Dad took a sip of his drink and muttered, "Well, at least they're useful." That was it. No one noticed the imbalance, or maybe they chose not to. Callista kept smiling, soaking in the approval that came so easily to her. I sat back, letting the noise of tearing paper and cheerful voices fade to a low hum. That simple pair of socks was a reminder, not a gift. A reminder that I didn't belong in the same category of love as everyone else. As laughter filled the room again, my mind wandered back to another Christmas, one I had spent as a child, long before I learned how to smile through things. I must have been 11. The tree had been smaller then, decorated with homemade ornaments that I'd made out of felt and string. I'd spent weeks beading a bracelet for Mom, a clumsy but heartfelt creation made of colored glass and wire. I'd wrapped it carefully, my small hands shaking with excitement. When the time came to exchange gifts, I watched her open it, hoping she'd see me in it. The patience, the thought, the love. She smiled, said, "Oh, honey, it's lovely," and set it aside. The next morning, I saw Callista wearing it. "She wears jewelry better," Mom said casually when I asked. "You don't mind, do you?" I remember smiling, nodding, pretending not to care. But that day, something small inside me cracked. That memory, buried for years, returned now sharper than ever. Sitting there with those ridiculous socks in my lap, I realized how little had changed. It wasn't that they forgot me. It was that they remembered exactly who I was to them less. Hours passed. Guests drifted in and out. The house dimmed as daylight faded, leaving only the twinkling lights of the Christmas tree to paint soft reflections on the floor. The chatter had quieted to murmurs, laughter turned into tired sighs. I found myself near the mantel again. The photo wall gleamed behind glass, each frame immaculate. Callista's achievements smiled down at me. I traced my finger across one of the frames, watching the dust on my fingertip. Mom approached from behind. "You see why we're so proud," she said gently. "I do," I replied. "She's worked so hard. She's earned all of this. You know, sometimes we forget how much responsibility comes with her position." "I'm sure it's a lot to carry," I said, keeping my voice level. "She's always been the strong one," Mom added. "Yeah," I said quietly. "She learned that from you." She didn't catch the edge of my tone, or she chose not to. She patted my arm, smiling faintly, and went off to tidy the coffee table. I looked around, noticing things differently now. The way people deferred to Callista, the way Mom's sentences always started with her name. Even the gifts followed the same pattern. Hers were thoughtful, mine were convenient. It wasn't coincidence. It was choreography. Favoritism wasn't an accident here. It was policy. I sat down at the dining table, the same spot I'd occupied during dinner, near the kitchen entry. The table was mostly cleared, except for a few scraps of wrapping paper and half-empty glasses. I stared at the socks again, the pink reindeer smiling up at me, mocking. On the table, I noticed a small scrap of gift wrap crumpled beneath a coaster. When I lifted it, I froze. The tag read, "To Tess." But someone had scratched out my name in thick black ink and rewritten, "To Callista." I stared at it for a long time, tracing the outline of where my name had been. It wasn't sloppy, it was deliberate. My stomach tightened, but my mind stayed clear. This wasn't about socks or bracelets or photo walls. It was about rewriting history in real time, reassigning affection, ownership, and identity to the person who already had everything. Callista didn't just take space in a room. She took the air, the credit, the narrative. And Mom made sure no one questioned it. I stood, walked into the kitchen, and pulled my phone from my pocket. My reflection in the dark window looked older than I remembered. I opened the Notes app and typed, "Pattern, dismiss, replace, public smile." I took a breath and added another line, "Don't react. Observe." The sound of laughter echoed faintly from the living room. Callista was retelling some story about a field operation that had apparently gone wrong until she arrived to fix it. The audience hung on every word. I turned back toward the counter, phone still in hand. When I picked up a scrap of wrapping paper from the trash to toss it, something shiny caught my eye. It was a small tag that had fallen behind the coffee maker. "To Tess," it read, printed in Mom's handwriting. but it had been crossed out too. Next to it, another label stuck on top. To Captain. I snapped a picture. I wasn't angry anymore. Just awake. That's when I knew this year would be different. I wasn't leaving quietly this time, and I wasn't collecting apologies I'd never get. No, this year I was collecting something else entirely. This year I wasn't just collecting insults, I was collecting evidence. After dinner, the mood shifted into something more performative, less about food and more about appearances. The lights dimmed just enough to make the living room glow, the fire in the hearth casting flickers across the walls lined with Callista's accolades. Someone had put on soft jazz through the Bluetooth speaker, and the dessert tray had been wheeled out like we were attending a banquet, not sitting in the same house where I used to get grounded for sneaking cookies. People were in and out of the kitchen, refilling drinks, complimenting Mom on her pie, complimenting Callista on her discipline, her poise, her medals. That word came up a lot. Discipline. I stayed near the end of the dessert table, pouring myself half a cup of lukewarm cider when I heard someone call for a group photo. "Let's do one by the fireplace," someone yelled. Everyone gathered quickly, chairs dragged, glasses set down, lipstick checked. I followed, more out of instinct than interest. As I reached for a serving dish on the sideboard to move it out of the frame, the sleeve of my sweater lifted just enough to expose my wristwatch, small, dark-faced, understated. "That's a fancy one," Callista's voice cut through the chatter. She pointed at my wrist, her tone light but loud enough for the whole room. "Didn't know gate duty paid that well. Is that a real Seiko?" I froze for a second. My hand hovered midair, fingers still on the dish. Laughter trickled in like a slow leak from a bad pipe. Not an eruption, just enough to sting. I didn't answer. I just placed the dish down carefully and turned toward the camera as someone counted. 3, 2.
Click.
That photo would live forever. Callista in the center, teeth bright, posture perfect, and me on the end, slightly out of frame, wearing a watch that was suddenly a punchline. Later, after a few more pictures and even more praise tossed in Callista's direction, I slipped out to the porch. The air had cooled significantly. I wrapped my arms around myself and leaned against the railing, the wood cold against my skin. Aunt Isolde followed me out, a half-full wine glass in hand, and the kind of smirk that told me she had something she wasn't supposed to say. "Hey, hon," she said, standing beside me like we were old pals. "Hope you're not too bothered by all the fuss in there. You know how your sister lights up a room." I shrugged. "She always has." She took a sip, eyes narrowed in that conspiratorial way people get when they're about to pretend they're doing you a favor. "So my husband mentioned something, just in passing, really. Said he heard you got a warning at work. Something about slacking off." I turned my head slowly. "What?" "Oh, nothing serious, I'm sure," she added quickly, waving her hand. "Probably just one of those things. Maybe someone saw something online. You know how people talk. Could have been Facebook, honestly." I stared at her. "You're telling me someone told your husband that I was disciplined at work and you think it might have come from Facebook?" She laughed nervously. "I mean, who knows? Things get exaggerated. But, well, you know, when there's smoke." I didn't finish her sentence. Instead, I looked back through the window into the living room where Callista stood with Mom, both of them laughing at something, heads bent close together. "Of course." Aunt Isolde took another sip and wandered off to find someone else to whisper to. I stayed outside long enough for the tip of my nose to go numb. Then I went back in, moving slowly, deliberately, like I was walking into a room I'd been summoned to. The couch cushions were rumpled, the dessert table nearly empty. A few people had left already, others beginning to gather coats. The end-of-night air had settled in, people satisfied, tipsy, full of themselves. I sat in the same chair I'd eaten dinner in, brushed a few cookie crumbs from my lap, and looked around. Callista was standing near the kitchen island with Mom again, both of them laughing in that tight, lockjaw way people do when they're trying to make sure others don't join the conversation. They glanced my way once, just once, and then looked away just as quickly. I adjusted the watch on my wrist, the same watch that had drawn chuckles earlier. A gift I bought for myself after my last raise. Not expensive, but dignified. Something I chose. Something earned. They want me to feel small, I whispered under my breath, but I've been building my backbone in silence. A moment later, I stood up and carried my plate to the sink. The kitchen was half-lit, a few bulbs under the cabinets glowing faintly. Callista followed behind me, empty glass in hand, moving like she had something to finish. We stood there for a second, me rinsing my plate, her setting her glass down loudly on the counter beside me. "So," she said, voice quiet but edged. "Still trying to prove something?" I didn't look at her. I dried my hands slowly, folded the towel. "Not to you," I said plainly. She smirked. "Then why keep showing up? You know how this goes." I turned to face her. "Because I have just as much right to be here as you do. And maybe, just maybe, it's time someone said it out loud." She raised an eyebrow. "Tess, no one's trying to." "But you are," I interrupted, soft but firm. "And you always have. You talk about me like I'm background noise, like I'm the warm-up act for your spotlight. I let it slide before. But you should stop assuming I'll always stay quiet." Her expression changed, not dramatically, just enough that I knew I'd struck something real. The kitchen went quiet for a beat. Then she smiled, that same polished smile she wore when giving speeches, the one that never reached her eyes. "Well, good talk." She picked up her glass and walked away. I didn't follow. Instead, I leaned against the sink and let the silence stretch. Because if I really wasn't here, none of their stories would hold up. Dinner had ended hours ago, but the night refused to settle. The air inside the house felt thick, heavy with unspoken tension and the faint sweetness of leftover pie. My mother was clearing dishes that were already clean, humming softly to herself, a habit she had whenever she was trying to pretend nothing was wrong. The cousins were saying their goodbyes, each one hugging Callista like she was the guest of honor instead of just another daughter coming home for Christmas. I stayed near the window, half listening, half counting the minutes until I could leave. But of course, peace is never allowed to last long in that house. Not when Callisto is around. She was standing near the tree, still in her uniform slacks and pressed blouse, sleeves rolled up, glass of wine in hand. The firelight caught the polished metal of her watch, bigger and shinier than mine. Her voice cut through the soft background music. "Hey, Tess," she called. "Did you ever bring in that last bag from your car?" I turned toward her. "Not yet. It's just the jam Mom asked me to pick up." Her eyebrows arched, amused, suspicious. "Jam?" "Yeah," I said slowly. "The specialty jars from the market. You texted me about them, remember?" She tilted her head, the way she used to when we were kids, and she wanted to make me squirm before tattling to Mom. "You've been here 2 days, and somehow that bag's still out there?" Mom appeared from the kitchen, drying her hands on a towel. "Just bring it in, Tess. No need to make a fuss." "There's no fuss," I said, smiling tightly. "It's cold out. The jam's fine where it is." Callista laughed under her breath, loud enough for the nearby relatives to hear. "What's in there that's so secret?" It happened so fast. 1 minute it was teasing, the next, the room had gone quiet. All eyes were on me. I met her gaze. "Excuse me?" She shrugged. "You're being weirdly protective over a grocery bag." "I'm just saying, if someone saw it, they might think." She let the sentence dangle in the air like a loaded question. Mom interrupted with a forced laugh. "Girls, let's not do this. It's Christmas." "No, it's fine," Callista said, waving her off. "I'm just asking a question." But her tone had shifted, sharp, purposeful, the same tone she used in command briefings when she already knew the answer, but wanted to see someone stumble. I took a deep breath. "If you're that curious, I'll get it right now." "Oh, I'll come with you," she said, setting down her glass. "You know, to keep you company." And just like that, we had an audience. I grabbed my coat, keys jingling in my hand. The front door creaked open, letting in a gust of cold December air that snapped at my cheeks. The night outside was calm, but my pulse was quick. The driveway glistened with a thin layer of frost under the porch light. Behind me, Callista's footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate. She stopped a few paces back, arms crossed. You parked farther down than usual, she said. Didn't want to block the driveway. How considerate. The air between us hung heavy with old resentments, years of being compared, dismissed, out-talked. I reached my car, pressed the unlock button, and the headlights blinked. I opened the back door and reached for the canvas tote sitting on the seat. It rustled softly, full of wrapped jars. Callista stepped closer. Anything you need to declare before I check it myself? I froze. The words didn't even sound real for a second. What did you just say? She smiled, that patronizing, tight-lipped smile that made me want to scream. Relax, I'm joking. But she wasn't. Her eyes darted to the tote bag, scanning it like she was assessing contraband. I straightened up, holding the bag against my chest. You're not touching my things. She raised both hands, mock surrender.
Fine.
If you've got nothing to hide. Stop. My voice came out calm, lower than I expected. You've made your point. A porch light flicked on across the street. Our neighbor, an older man with a dog, stood at the fence, watching. He gave an awkward half-smile, sensing tension he didn't understand. I placed the tote bag on the hood of the car and opened it slowly, pulling out one jar at a time. Peach preserves, I said, setting it down. Blueberry.
Strawberry.
Mom's favorite. Still want to check them? Callista said nothing, but her face twitched, the kind of twitch that happens when a mask slips for half a second. I reached into my pocket and unfolded the crumpled receipt from the store. Here, I said, in case you need proof. Her lips parted, but no sound came. This isn't about jam, I said, my voice steady now. You know that. She blinked. Then what is it about? It's about control, I said softly. And you're used to having it. You can't stand when someone won't play along. The silence between us was almost physical, thick with unsaid things. The only sound was the faint jingle of her bracelet when she folded her arms again. For a moment, we stood there under the cold light, just two silhouettes, one clinging to power, the other reclaiming space. I picked up the tote, zipped it closed, and looked her dead in the eyes. If you cross the line again, I will not protect you. Her jaw tightened. Protect me? Yeah, I said. You think I haven't heard what you've been saying about me at work, to people you know? You've been pulling strings for years, Callista. But I'm not your pawn anymore. Her face went pale. You're imagining things. I shook my head.
No.
I'm finally seeing them. With that, I turned and walked back toward the house. Behind me, I could feel her eyes on my back, burning holes through the night air. Inside, the warmth hit me like a wave. Everyone had gone quiet. They must have seen us through the window. Mom stood by the sink, pretending to scrub a spotless plate. Everything okay? She asked without looking at me.
Fine, I said.
Just cold out. Callista came in a minute later, cheeks flushed. She brushed past me without a word and disappeared down the hall. Dad tried to break the silence. Anybody want coffee? No one answered. Mom went back to rewashing dishes that didn't need cleaning. The sound of running water filled the room like static. I sat down on the couch, the cushions sagging under me, and took out my phone. I opened the secure messaging app one used for work, our department's internal channel. My thumb hovered over the contact list. I could type her name right now. I could start something that would end her career. But I didn't. Not yet. Instead, I opened my notes app and wrote a single line. When dignity isn't given, document everything. The soft hum of the dishwasher and the faint rustle of wrapping paper were the only sounds left. The laughter, the music, the pretense, they'd all been stripped away. For the first time that night, I felt clarity. Not comfort, not peace, but clarity. This wasn't over. I closed the note and leaned back, exhaling slowly. Next time she tries to control the story, I'll control the facts. Even before the fireplace cooled, I felt the shift in the room. It wasn't loud or sudden. It was quiet, calculated, like a storm that knows it doesn't need thunder to bring destruction. One moment I was standing beside the couch, adjusting the sleeve of my sweater. The next, I was being arranged for a family photo like a throw pillow nobody wanted, but didn't know where to put. Everyone by the tree. Mom called out cheerfully, clapping her hands. Let's do one more group shot before dessert ends. The usual chorus of holiday groans followed, someone muttering about lighting, another uncle asking where his good side was. Callista was already standing tall in the center. Of course, her posture perfect, her smile just enough to look genuine in photos, but not soft enough to suggest vulnerability. I hovered near the right side of the group, just behind a cousin and half-shadowed by the tree. I wasn't trying to hide. I just knew my place. The photographer, Callista's friend from her military unit, held up her phone and gave us the usual count. 3, 2. And just as the fake smiles locked into place and the shutter clicked, I heard her voice. You're not going to keep getting away with lying, Tess. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. I turned slowly, eyes blinking in disbelief, but Callista was already stepping out from the photo cluster, walking straight toward me. The camera lowered. People shifted awkwardly. What did you just say? I asked, my voice low, but sharp enough to freeze my mother mid-smile. You heard me, she said, louder now. You've been tampering with base inventory. I've seen the records. Laughter and conversation dropped to nothing. Callista, Mom said gently, not now. I have cause, she snapped, digging into the inside of her jacket. I've let this slide long enough. I didn't move. I didn't even blink when I saw what she pulled out. Handcuffs. A pair of standard-issue stainless steel cuffs, not the cheap novelty kind people joked about at bachelorette parties. Real ones. The room inhaled. You've lost your mind, I said, stunned, but still calm. I'm doing my duty, she replied coldly. You don't get to hide behind that job title anymore. She reached for my wrist. I backed up slightly. Callista, don't. This is standard protocol for unauthorized access to restricted materials. You don't have authority here. I'm still a captain, she said firmly, glancing around the room for validation. And I have reasonable suspicion. Based on what? I asked, but she wasn't answering. Mom gasped. Callista, what are you? This is your sister. She's jeopardizing my clearance, Mom. Callista snapped, already grabbing my arm. My breath caught as the cold metal clicked around my left wrist. Her grip was hard. Harder than it needed to be. The room watched, too stunned to intervene. This is insane, I whispered. You think I'm bluffing? She hissed in my ear as she reached for my other hand. But I was already turning, rotating my wrist just enough to let the edge of my smartwatch face upward. My fingers slid along the band, pressing down a hidden sequence. 4 taps, pause, then 2 more. A soft vibration. That was all it took. A secure alert activated, GPS location, audio timestamp, live feed logged directly into the Pentagon's incident database. It was silent but immediate. Anyone watching on the other end would see my coordinates, hear the clinking of cuffs, and begin a protocol reserved for federal violations of authority. I didn't resist. I didn't struggle. I stood there as the second cuff snapped into place. Callista let go like she'd just delivered a final blow and backed away, breathing heavy, like she'd run a race she didn't train for. Silence. Nobody moved. Not Mom. Not Dad. Not any of the guests still hovering near the punch bowl. Then the whispers began. She's cuffed her own sister? What is going on? Did she really just... I walked toward the front window, the cuffs biting into my wrists with every step, and sat down in the chair beside the Christmas tree. The lights blinked calmly, unaware that peace had just been publicly murdered. Mom ran after Callista, dragging her into the hallway, whisper shouting about optics and family and respect. Someone tried to turn the music back on. It was the wrong song, too cheerful, and someone else turned it back off. I sat in silence. A cousin leaned over to Mom. Did she really steal something? Mom shook her head, her voice brittle. It's just a misunderstanding. Military sisters, you know how they are.
No.
No one knew how we were. I stared out the window at the street lamp beyond the driveway, watching frost creep up the glass, and said clearly, without turning around, "No." But she just stole from herself. No one responded. But the message didn't need repeating. Aunt Jean picked up her purse. "We should probably go," she murmured to her husband. Uncle Ray nodded.
Yeah.
"This feels not like Christmas." I stayed by the window, unmoving. The digital display on my watch still blinked green, a signal that the alert was received, recorded, and being escalated. Help was already on the way. And this time, I wasn't calling it off. The night outside had deepened into that quiet hour when even the air feels heavy. The Christmas lights blinked lazily against the frost on the windows. Inside, I stayed seated by the tree, my wrists still encircled by the cuffs that gleamed dully in the firelight. My arms ached, but I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of seeing me struggle. The hum of my smartwatch had stopped minutes ago. The signal was already gone, traveled up through satellites and networks into offices where people didn't have family names for their enemies. Callista was pacing the room like a drill sergeant without troops, muttering under her breath about duty and protocol. Our mother stood by the kitchen counter, twisting her wedding ring, her lips moving soundlessly. My father had gone quiet, his face gray, eyes locked on the flames. It was all theater now, each of them playing the same parts they'd rehearsed for decades. Then, through the front window, I saw them. 2 SUVs turned into the driveway, dark and unmarked except for the glint of amber lights near their grills. Tires crunched against frozen gravel. Headlights swept across the porch. The murmurs inside stopped instantly, cut off like a light switch. The first knock came hard enough to rattle the garland hanging on the door. My mother froze. "Oh God," she whispered. Callista straightened her shoulders, the reflex of someone used to authority. She opened the door with the stiffness of a soldier about to be inspected. 3 people stood there.
Suits.
Not uniforms. One flashed a badge. "Captain Callista Whitman?" Her voice was thin but steady. "Yes." "Internal Military Compliance Division," the man said. "We need to speak with you immediately." Behind him, another agent scanned the living room. "We were alerted to a live incident involving a misuse of federal protocol." Callista's jaw tensed. "This is a family matter. My sister." The lead agent held up a hand. "Ma'am, that's precisely what makes it worse." The word worse echoed through the house like a crack in ice. "Is there somewhere private we can talk?" the man asked. My mother stammered. "Teach the living room. Please come in." They entered quietly, shoes leaving small wet spots on the hardwood. The taller one noticed the cuffs first. "Remove those," he said curtly. Callista opened her mouth to argue, but the second agent, a woman, had already stepped forward and clicked them open herself. The sound of the metal releasing was louder than it should have been. I rubbed my wrists, the skin raw where it had pressed into bone. The woman spoke next, voice calm but sharp. "Captain Whitman, you are being placed on administrative suspension pending investigation for misuse of authority under Title 10, Section 892. You are not under arrest. However, your sidearm and credentials will be retained until further notice." Mom gasped. "You can't just—" "Ma'am," the agent interrupted gently. "We're following procedure." Callista's face flushed. "You can't be serious. This was a misunderstanding. She's my sister." The lead agent didn't flinch. "And you used your position to detain her unlawfully in a domestic setting. That's a violation. There's no gray area here, Captain. I was protecting federal property." He tilted his head. "In your mother's living room?" The room fell silent again. He gestured toward her. "Badge and sidearm, please." When she hesitated, the woman stepped forward. For a second, Callista's hand hovered near her belt, and I thought, just for an instant, she might refuse. But then her eyes darted toward mine, and she saw it. Calm. Not smugness. Not revenge. Just calm. She unhooked the badge, the metal catching the glow of the fire, and set it on the table beside her holster. The agent nodded. "Thank you, Captain. We'll conduct an initial inquiry now." He turned toward me. Miss Whitman, are you all right? I'm fine, I said softly. Better than I was an hour ago. They began setting up at the dining table, files, notepads, a small tablet. The scene had turned clinical. Paper replaced pretense. One agent produced a printed document from a folder. This was brought to our attention during the preliminary data pull, he said, laying it flat. My name leapt off the page before he spoke another word. Civilian Liaison, Tess Whitman. Authorized for supply access, code F4A198. My signature, except it wasn't mine. Filed 3 months ago, he said. Timestamp from the base network matches Captain Whitman's credentials. I looked at my sister. Her expression didn't move, but her pulse throbbed visibly at her neck. That's not possible, she said finally. The agent nodded to the woman, who slid a tablet across the table. The entry log shows it was accessed from your terminal. Late evening, 21:47 hours. Do you recall that time? Callista shook her head. I must have delegated. Someone must have used my login. That's unlikely, the woman said. Your system has two-factor authentication. Fingerprint and passcode. No one else could have submitted this unless you gave them direct access. All the color drained from my mother's face. She looked from the paper to Callista, then to me. What does that even mean? It means, the agent said evenly, your daughter falsified federal documentation, using her sister's name as a cover for inventory discrepancies. Mom's voice broke. I trusted you, she whispered. Callista finally turned on her. Oh, don't start with that. You've been trusting me to carry this family since I was old enough to walk. Everything I've done, every single thing, was for us. The agent raised his hand. Captain, that's enough. Her voice cracked, but the authority was gone. You think I'd risk everything over paperwork? It's ridiculous. The man didn't respond. He was already typing notes into the tablet. You'll be escorted to headquarters for debriefing. We'll notify you of the formal interview schedule within 24 hours. She stood frozen, as if the room itself had turned against her. When they moved to guide her toward the door, she looked at me. For the first time in my life, I saw fear in her eyes, not the kind born of danger, but of exposure. Tess, she said, her voice trembling. Say something. I met her gaze. You didn't just handcuff me, Callista. You erased me. You wrote my name where yours should have been. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. I turned to my mother. And you didn't hold the cuffs, but you helped lock them. Her chin quivered. I didn't know. No, I said quietly. You didn't ask. The agents led Callista out, their steps heavy against the floorboards. The door closed behind them, the echo stretching long after they were gone. For the first time all night, the house was still. My father sank into the recliner, burying his face in his hands. Mom stood motionless, one hand on the back of a chair. I walked toward the window again, the frost thicker now, the street bathed in flashing amber light as the SUVs reversed down the drive. She'll be all right, Mom whispered, almost to herself. I didn't answer, because in that moment, I knew this wasn't about who would be all right. It was about who finally wasn't pretending anymore. This was never just a misunderstanding. This was a mission. And now it's mine. The house had gone quiet, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that settles after a bomb drops, when everything is still standing, but nothing feels steady. The warmth from the fireplace couldn't soften the air. Even the blinking lights on the Christmas tree looked uncertain, like they didn't know if they were supposed to keep shining. I stood there for a moment, unmoving, in the same place I'd watched Callista be escorted out just minutes earlier. The echo of her boots on the hardwood still rang in my ears. What lingered wasn't victory. It was silence, dense and long overdue. The dining room had mostly emptied. Guests who had stayed long enough to witness the unraveling had quietly made their exits. I could still hear someone's voice from earlier, low and unsure. She didn't deserve that. Funny. No one had said that when I was the one in handcuffs. Vera hadn't spoken since Callista left. She sat rigid on the arm of the couch, hands clasped like she was holding together some last bit of grace. Every now and then, she'd glance in my direction, but her eyes never made contact. I couldn't tell if she was embarrassed, furious, or simply unraveling under the weight of finally seeing something she didn't want to admit. And then there was Dad. He hadn't moved much either. The whole time the agents were here, he'd been in the corner chair, the same one he always claimed during football games, hands folded, lips tight, breathing slow and steady like a man trying to disappear into his own body. I needed air. I slipped into the kitchen to rinse out my wine glass, the water running too long, echoing off the stainless steel sink. I wasn't thirsty. I just needed something to do with my hands. That's when he came in behind me. His footsteps were slower now than I remembered, more uneven. He didn't say anything at first, just stood there in the doorway, holding onto the frame like the weight of the night had shifted something inside him. I should have stopped it earlier, he said finally, his voice low, rough with something heavier than shame. That's on me. I didn't turn around. My fingers traced slow circles on the rim of the glass. You didn't deserve to be erased, he added, softer now. It hit different coming from him, not because it fixed anything, but because I knew how rarely he spoke when it counted. He had always been the quiet parent, the one who nodded more than he talked. But in that moment, he didn't feel passive. He felt present. I nodded. That was all I could give him. It was enough. Later that night, after the kitchen had been cleaned for the third time and Vera had retreated to her bedroom with a bottle of wine and no explanation, I slipped out to my car. The cold greeted me with its usual honesty. No politics. No roles. Just wind and quiet. I started the engine, letting the heater come alive with a sputter. My phone buzzed in the cup holder, the screen lighting up with a message on my secure line, the internal comm system that only a handful of federal contractors used. The subject line was blank. No name attached. Just a message that filled the screen. I saw the footage. I've been in your shoes. Thank you for not staying silent. That was it. No signature. No details. Just the words. I stared at it longer than I needed to. Not because I didn't understand what it meant, but because it was the first time in years someone had acknowledged what I carried without trying to reshape it. The footage had gone through the system already. The smart alert had triggered a recording, video, audio, timestamps. It would be logged, reviewed, archived, dissected. But that message, from someone I'd never meet, carried more validation than every badge in Callista's shadow box combined. I turned off the engine and leaned back in my seat. The frost had begun to creep up the windshield again, drawing slow, silvery veins across the glass. For a long time, I sat there, no music, no calls. Just my own breathing, the hum of the world continuing on outside me. Eventually, I picked up the phone again. I opened the voice memo app and hit record. I didn't want revenge, I said aloud, my voice steady. I wanted reality to show its face. And it did. I paused, staring through the frost-blurred windshield toward the house I had just exited. Same bricks, same porch, same people tucked inside. Except now, everything was different. I'm not angry, I added after a beat. I'm just not hiding anymore. I ended the recording and saved it, not for posting, not for sharing, just for me. For the nights I'd need reminding of who I'd finally become. Before pulling out of the driveway, I glanced one last time toward the window. The lights inside were dim. The curtain twitched. Maybe someone was watching. Maybe not. But this wasn't their story anymore. It was mine. I put the car in drive and eased onto the road, the tires crunching gently over the frost. The report's done. The scars aren't. But at least now, they're mine to carry, not hers to place. The morning of New Year's Day came quietly, the kind of quiet you feel in your bones before you open your eyes. No chaos, no buzzing phones, no emergency texts, just a thin band of winter light peeking through the blinds of my apartment. I'd slept better than I had in weeks. It wasn't restful, but it was complete. That kind of sleep only comes after a war you didn't start, but chose to finish. I was halfway through my coffee when the text arrived. From Vera. We're doing a simple breakfast on New Year's Day. You're welcome. No, Captain will be there. No half-coded emotional digs. Just 8 words.
Clean.
Unloaded. I stared at it longer than necessary. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Maybe an edit, maybe a follow-up saying it was sent by mistake. But nothing came. I read it again. And again. Then I set the mug down, took a breath, and replied, "I'll be there at 10. Not because I needed to be. Not to please her. Not to make peace. I was going for one reason only, to mark the moment I stopped letting other people define where I belonged." The drive was short, familiar. The houses looked different now, same decorations, same mailboxes, but the weight I used to carry between those sidewalks was gone. I parked where I always did, tucked under the tree at the corner of the cul-de-sac. Inside, the air smelled of pancakes and weak coffee. Someone had opened a window, letting the morning breeze mix with syrup and salt. The house was quieter than usual. No shouting, no greetings tossed from room to room. Just muted conversation and the soft clink of dishes being set on the table. I walked through the front door without knocking. The photo wall was still there, but the symmetry was off now. One of Callista's framed commendations had been taken down. The hook sat empty, a faint outline left behind like a memory trying to disappear, but not quite fading. No one said much as I entered. Vera looked up from her place at the kitchen counter. Her expression was unreadable, less sharp than before, more worn than softened. She didn't smile. She didn't frown. She nodded. That was all. There were 7 chairs around the breakfast table. 6 were filled. 1 sat open, centered, not off to the side. No name cards. No instructions. Just a gap. I took off my coat, folded it once, laid it neatly across the back of the chair. Then, without looking for permission or invitation, I walked to the center of the table and pulled out the seat. It didn't creak. I sat. Someone passed me a plate. Another poured orange juice into my glass. No fuss. No tension. Just hands doing what hands are supposed to do when someone sits at their table. Vera sat opposite me. She didn't say anything for a while. She took a bite of toast.
Chewed.
Swallowed. Looked at her plate. Then, finally, she raised her cup.
"To new mornings," she said.
I raised mine. And to earn seats. It wasn't applause-worthy. No cinematic swell of music. But everyone around the table lifted their cups too. Even Dad, who'd remained quiet throughout the meal, gave a small nod before sipping. We ate. We didn't perform. We simply existed, same house, same walls, but something felt slightly reassembled. When breakfast ended, people helped with the dishes without being asked. I rinsed out the syrup bottle and set it in the recycling. No one told me to sit. No one told me not to move. I left without a goodbye party. Just a few simple take cares. A hug from my younger cousin and another nod from Dad. Back in my apartment that night, I changed into my most comfortable clothes, brewed chamomile tea, and opened my laptop. The glow of the screen felt different this time. Less like an escape, more like a mirror. I opened the draft I'd been avoiding for months. An op-ed titled, "When Respect Isn't Given, Speak Anyway." The cursor blinked at the end of the final paragraph. I hadn't touched it since the summer, back when I thought telling the truth would just cause more chaos. I read it again. Every line rang true, but I didn't click publish. Not yet. Instead, I opened a new document and began writing from scratch. Not to erase the past, but to acknowledge that I wasn't the same person who wrote those words anymore. I wrote. They never had to believe me. They just had to stop rewriting me. I saved it. Closed the laptop. Outside, the street was quiet again. A couple across the way was hauling their dried-up tree to the curb. Another holiday done. Another year survived. Healing is slow, but truth doesn't limp. It walks, quietly, steadily, beside you if you let it. I poured another cup of tea and sat by the window, my breath fogging the glass. The seat beneath me felt earned, not borrowed, not begged for. Because I didn't steal a seat. I claimed the one they kept forgetting had my name on it. Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones who rewrite our stories in silence until we decide to write them ourselves. This wasn't a story about revenge. It was a reminder. Dignity isn't something you're given. It's something you take back, one quiet decision at a time. Have you ever been the forgotten one in your own family? Share your story in the comments, and if this resonated